Hello, Canada. Welcome back to another edition of the Canadian Citizen Journal. I'm your host, alias Tagai. Lots and lots going on. Daniel Smith has just pretty much moved the last piece necessary in order to slide into Checkmate on Alberta's secession. And I'm going to make this correction because I have a lot of people from Saskatchewan who have been telling me, make sure you include us. And guess what? Yes, I have checked the numbers. People, this is millions. We're talking a huge demographic of Alberta and a huge demographic of Saskatchewan that are ready to leave. This is unbelievable how many people are joining these groups. And like I've said on previous episodes, I can't even keep track of all the new groups that are following. The Alberta separation movement is exploding. Mo, you better get your crap together because you're probably going to lose from a split vote on the parties within your province that are wanting to follow through with what seems to be the majority. I haven't seen a poll out lately. I would love for somebody to actually poll this, but just from running my own numbers, it's about 70%. Now, again, it's a hard thing because it's not like I have the time to sit down and make a bunch of phone calls and talk to all the different, but I haven't got a single Saskatchewanite saying on any of my social media that they're against it. Everyone that I have seen has said, hey, us too. Don't forget to include us. Hey, alias, put us in. Make sure you include us. So there you go. I'm including you in here from now on because it is that huge. It is that huge. Daniel Smith had a presser, dropping bombs. Let's dive right into it. This is huge. The media is too busy trying to slander and smear her because they are afraid. The propaganda arm of the Liberal government and the Liberal government are afraid of what the potential is going on in these provinces. If they leave, Canada falls. Understand this, Canada. Get it through your thick heads. For those people who are, which scares me, card-holding Liberals. Ooh, man, that's as SS as it gets. That just scares me. Card holders, scary. You're gonna flush yourself down the toilet. Canada cannot stand without Alberta and Saskatchewan. Period. Nobody cares about Quebec. I'm sorry to all of you Quebecers. I've got a couple that have reached out to me and voiced your opinions. I'm glad you watched the episodes. I'm glad I got to wake you up and have some discussions on other social media outfits. But the reality is, your government are leeches. Since the day we started handing out money in equalization payments, you've taken every single year you have been caught lying on your books and cheating Canadians. And the fact that you have a separatist party that controls and is allowed to be in the federal government has disillusioned the rest of, well, especially the prairies, on the reality that you guys are even Canadian anymore. Everybody's telling me that on this Alberta, Saskatchewan, the comments I get, they're not leaving Canada. Canada left them. They're securing Canada within their own new country. And I have a tendency to have to agree with them. Sorry, not sorry. This is the reality. Canada is a socialist nation. After this last 10 years, we have confirmed we are a socialist nation. When you can control people's speech, control what they see, control what they hear, control everything about it, you are not a free nation. You may think you are a democratic nation, but when they control the smallest area in Canada that controls the actual federal government of an entire nation by your propaganda, we failed. Canada is a failed democracy. And we are tapping, in fact, we are opening the door to full-fledged fascism. Without further ado, let us move on and get through this as quickly as possible. Go ahead, Danielle.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to be here with Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, and Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery. We're announcing that government will introduce amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act to protect essential infrastructure, which in turn protects Alberta's economy and its people. Some amendments are focused on the southern border. Earlier this year, we created a 2-kilometer deep zone in Alberta side of the Canada-US border and deployed the interdiction patrol team to secure it. Now we're moving that zone into the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, so the definition of essential infrastructure is listed in one place. Alone, this would be just a bit of legislative housekeeping, but the amendments don't stop there. They also designate oil and gas production sites and facilities where emissions data and records are held as essential infrastructure. This amendment to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act provides an extra tool to safeguard essential infrastructure from interference, and that includes interference from Ottawa. I would certainly hope that the new Prime Minister has taken the time to read our Constitution, and I would direct him to pay specific attention to Section 92A, which gives the province, not the federal government, the exclusive jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resource development. Alberta will continue in its pursuit of doubling our oil and gas production to meet the growing global demand for energy. And we will not let Ottawa stand in our way. We will not tolerate the continuous unconstitutional overreaches made by the federal Liberal government. Measures like the emissions cap, the net zero electricity regs, the net zero electric vehicle mandate, and the energy industry advertising ban must be stopped now. And make no mistake, Alberta will do whatever it takes to shield our economy from the Liberals' growth-killing lunacy. These amendments we're introducing today would include denying federal workers access to our facilities and the information they contain. I will continue to fiercely and unapologetically stand up for Albertans and defend the best interest of our province, our economy, and our industry. This ongoing tariff dispute has proven now more than ever that Canada must build big and build fast to reach new global markets for export. Canadians and politicians from across the country are calling for new pipelines to be built, east, west, and north, to secure our future and end our reliance upon our southern trading partner. However, if the new Prime Minister wants to resume an old fight, well, we will. We'll fight tooth and nail. Because if we can't make these decisions and build, then it's so obvious, when it's so obviously in the national interest, then what kind of an economic future does Canada have? Today's amendments are a warning, but they're also an invitation to Ottawa. Let's talk. Let's rise to the occasion. Let's use Canada's riches to protect our nation. And with that, I'd like to ask Minister Mickey Amery to share more details about the amendments.
Well, thank you, Premier, and good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to be here today to share more about our amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act and how our amendments will continue to protect our province and our southern border and stand up against overreaches by the Liberal federal government. Alberta's Critical Infrastructure Defence Act was first introduced to protect essential infrastructure from trespassers, interference, and damage of any kind, especially those that could cause significant risk to the public safety of Albertans. This act protects essential infrastructure by creating offences under the act of trespassing, interfering with operations, or causing damage to property. Public safety is a top priority for our government, and that's no surprise. It's why in December our government announced a plan to secure the Alberta-US border to crack down on illegal activity and keep illicit drugs out of our province. One of these commitments to secure the border was to create a 2-kilometer buffer zone to be designated as essential infrastructure.
Now, Daniel Smith was the first premier to listen to what Trump said and act on it. There has been more money spent per capita on Alberta's border and security than any other province. She has followed through with every demand necessary to try to save Canada from Trump's fury. She has been heckled and called all types of names, treasonous and all the rest from mainstream media as they continue to try to get her out of power. These lies come right down to what's going on with these stupid lawsuits where literally they're lies and slander put out by Nenshi's little minions and the federal government. Remember, Alberta or the Liberals and NDP are a uniparty. They work hand in hand together. A vote for the Liberal is a vote for an NDP. A vote for an NDP is a vote for a Liberal. This is the reality. She has tried everything to try and keep Canada together. And this is her greatest, probably, it's the hardest thing for her to do, considering how separatism has been on the minds of Alberta since Trudeau first got elected. And even before that, like, this has gone on for generations. It's just now it's grown out an explanation. Like, just, it's insane. She has got a huge fight. She is trying so hard to get the word out. She is trying so hard to break the media bullcrap and get Canada to wake up and realize how close you are to losing them. It is going to happen if Carney wins. Rest assured, it's going to happen.
Since then, we've taken swift action to amend the Critical Infrastructure Defense Regulation to designate this border zone as critical infrastructure, with plans to amend the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act this spring. And that's why in the House this afternoon, I will introduce Bill 45, the Critical Infrastructure Defense Amendment Act 2025. If passed, this bill would provide crucial amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, and as I mentioned, further enhance security at the Alberta-US border and protect our province's economy and citizens from the harmful, job-killing federal emissions cap. Speaking of the federal emissions cap, Alberta's government is proposing amendments to the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act that would update the definition of essential infrastructure to add facilities where oil and gas production and emissions data and records are held, and to explicitly state that the act applies to the federal government. These amendments are in line with the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada motion, which was passed in December of 2024, that introduced measures to stop a federal emissions cap from damaging the province's economy, industry, and its prosperity. As I mentioned before, as part of our continued efforts to strengthen security at the international border, amendments would move the border zone portion of the definition of essential infrastructure into the Act itself. With the Act being amended, it makes sense to update it to ensure the definition of essential infrastructure is fully captured in a single place. Currently, the 2 kilometer deep border zone north of the entire Alberta United States border is included in the Critical Infrastructure Defense Regulation. The inclusion of that 2 kilometer border zone to the definition of essential infrastructure provides peace officers with additional tools to protect the area from trespassing, interference, or damage when people have no lawful right, justification, or excuse to be in that area. I want to be absolutely clear. Individuals who are legally working, living, or traveling in that 2 kilometer zone may continue to do so unimpeded. Today's legislation being introduced outlines significant progress to protect essential infrastructure and the critical border zone. And these amendments also ensure our province has the ability to produce responsible energy and meet the world's growing demands. Public safety and Alberta's economic prosperity are two of our government's highest priorities. Whether we are strengthening border security or calling on the federal government to scrap its emissions cap, our government will continue to protect public safety and defend Alberta's interests when the federal government introduces policies that negatively impact our province. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to...
Now, Canada, your government has been lying to you, not a little bit. Full-fledged lying. People are not aware, and I've exposed this in my two-part series I did on exposing Carney. That I can keep going and going and going and finding more and more information on how evil this guy is. What he's done is treasonous and beyond conflict of interests. I'm going to show you something. This is just another document. I'm just going to document, just another article. I'm going to keep bringing these up and hope that as my subscribers grow and as especially the long versions, not just my shorts that I do on different platforms. We've got to break this media bubble. People need to see this. The media is lying to you about Carney. He should never have even been near the federal government as a financial advisor, let alone be allowed to run and be appointed as the leader of the Liberal Party and given, without Canadians' consent, the seat of the Prime Minister. I'm going to read this to you. Pay close attention. Carney's net zero investment firm has billions in coal and oil sands projects. Now, I've showed you on, like I said, on previous episodes and my bombshells that I dropped on that two-part series, how they're taking over by squashing and putting legislation in to stop our resource flow or growth. They have been going through and buying up, because now these companies are losing huge value. They can walk in and they can buy up all of these little companies. And with the help of our taxpayer dollars like TMX, they, for some reason, get to be able to get the bid to finish building and investing in that pipeline. Conflict of interest. This is highly illegal. This practice is beyond evil. Here's more proof. A Canadian company that employs UN climate finance envoy Mark Carney as vice chair has invested billions of dollars in fossil fuel projects, including a coal port and an oil sands pipeline. This we know. Mark Carney, the former governor of Bank of England, is now Boris Johnson's finance minister in COP26 climate summit. In addition to his high-profile role for the UN, he joined Brookfield Asset Management last August. Now, this is an older article, but it's still exposing. With special responsibility for environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG. Evil, evil, evil people. Earlier this month, Carney told Bloomberg TV that Brookfield is net zero across its $575 billion asset portfolio. Quebec, listen up, because you guys diverted your pensions over to Brookfield and away from pipelines when all you did is moved from being the reality and exposing that you were invested in pipelines to hiding behind the shield of Brookfield's supposed green crap when you're really still invested in pipelines. It has achieved net zero because they have this enormous renewables business that we built up over all avoided emissions that come with it. Again, in a previous episode where I blew the lid off of Carney's Brookfield, burning forests down in Brazil, building dams that don't even need to be there in order to create a false carbon positive credit system. Lies, people, lies. Unearth Analysis has identified 5 major fossil fuel infrastructure projects in which Brookfield is a leading shareholder, including significant projects in the highly polluting coal and oil sands projects. Bill Hare, Director of Climate Analytics, an NGO, warned that offsetting fossil fuel projects against avoiding emissions, as Carney appeared to do, was not the reasonable definition of net zero. The Dairy Maple Bay coal, natural gas pipelines in America, Interpipeline in Canada, Abu Dhabi natural gas infrastructure, the East-West pipeline in Canada. This goes on and on. They are also trying to take over the oil sands. Yes, they have been trying to buy out the control, the majority shareholder and control of the oil sands. This goes on, and there's piles of this documentation and different editorials that have come up showing this, that the media is lying to you, blatantly lying to you. Let's move on a little bit further in Daniel's presser. Take it away.
I'm hoping you can just clarify something, because when we asked during the tech briefing, they directed these questions to you, which was kind of odd because it seems to me like a very technical question. How does the reporting on emissions data work currently in the private sector? Like, does the current emissions reporting process necessarily involve federal officials needing to physically go into these private facility, or would banning these federal employees not affect emissions reporting in any way practically?
Well, this is part of the issue, is that we don't have a single source of truth for emissions data. We found that when we were looking at our methane emissions. By our calculation, which is looking at source materials, they had reduced their emissions 45% from 2005 levels 2 years early. The federal government hired some outside organization to do some aerial scanning, and they came up with a different number. And so if we're going to have these kinds of disputes, we know that there needs to be a single source of truth when it comes to actual on-site data, and we're going to collect that, and then we'll make sure that it is shared. But we believe that because the federal government has come up with different numbers at different times for their own purposes, we think that we actually need to get real data. And because we're the ones on the ground, we'll be the ones able to do that work.
So this bill doesn't explicitly ban emissions data reporting by private companies to the federal government.
They will report to us. It's our data, and then we will report to the federal government. Remember, the energy companies, especially since we own the resource and we permit the resource, they develop the resource on our behalf. And so in doing so, we have an obligation to collect the data, and we'll report it to the federal government. But
that still doesn't answer, like, is this currently happening? Like, is this a hypothetical ban on if sometime in the future the federal government decides to send officials into the Suncor offices in Calgary? Like, this is a hypothetical ban of something that isn't even happening?
I don't know if it's hypothetical. I mean, we observed when they were wanting to do water testing, that they were going onto people's property in Saskatchewan and doing water testing as a way of trying to, I think, develop some pretext for new emissions data they were going to come in with on fertilizer. And the Saskatchewan government did something quite similar in saying federal agents are not going to be allowed to just show up on people's private land to start testing their dugouts and water. And so this has already been demonstrated in the past that there have been issues, and we just are anticipating that if there are future issues, we're closing that door. The emissions data, we have to remember the other part of it is the government has made it illegal for companies to celebrate their emissions reduction. The Bill C-59 I referenced, they're not allowed to proactively talk about their positive progress that they're making on emissions because it's called greenwashing, and then they could also ultimately face charges. So the entity that is shielded from those laws are the provincial government. So they've actually put us into a position that if we want to be able to collect and report emissions data, we have to collect it ourselves, and we have to be able to report it ourselves. So that's what we're going to do.
Thanks, Lisa. And Michelle, we're going to go to Shay. You've already had 2 questions.
What happens if a company doesn't comply?
Well, we license them, so they're going
Yeah, but
to.
there's
It'll
nothing, I
be.
don't see anything in here that would
We have the.
suggest that there's a penalty for them.
Well, we can make that a condition of us doing the leases. So there's lots that you can do,
Retroactive?
there's lots that you can do in regulation. But
Retroactively?
Well,
You
but,
do that?
but we intend to enforce the law, and I would think that the companies are probably going to be pretty happy with the fact that we're willing to take this reporting obligation off their hands. They'll probably be quite happy that because we will have a government-approved source of information that perhaps they'll be able to then talk about, they'll be able to cite us when we're talking about our emissions reduction success. So the federal government has put us into a box, and we're finding a way to be able to make sure that we're collecting the data and able to report the data with the rules that they put in place.
All right. And Chase, you have a question?
Yes, yeah, still questions. I guess just a couple, following up on your answer to Lisa's question, you had mentioned federal agents just would not be able to do that. Is the suggestion there that they would be arrested, and by whom? And then just as a follow-up, while we're still in the legal sphere, Canada's top court has ruled that under the Constitution's peace, order, and good government clause, Ottawa has the authority to enact laws that impact the entire country, such as emissions. So are you anticipating any sort of legal challenge from Ottawa on this, and what is your argument to defend against
I'll let Mike talk about the trespassing, and I'll let Mickey talk about the extensive way that they've used peace, order, and good government that may not be good lawmaking, and we'd be intending to challenge that too.
Mickey, do you want to talk about it?
Well, you go first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just your question was like anything, it's about a matter of talking to people, and hopefully if there is a requirement for somebody to go on somebody else's land, that they talk to the landowner. I think it's completely inappropriate, and I agree with what the Premier mentioned in regards to Saskatchewan. Nobody should have a right to just go on somebody else's property, whether you're being directed by the federal government or not, and just go onto somebody's property and do whatever they think that they've been directed to do. So I'm not going to go down the road whether or not hypothetically somebody's going to be arrested or not arrested. Right now, we would just really hope that people in the federal government abide by, really in respect to property owners and property rights.
Thank you very much. And to the second part of your question, I mean, we have a history with the federal government and its lack of respect for Alberta's jurisdiction. We talked a little bit about Section 92 today. We talked a little bit about our exclusive ability to develop our natural resources. We've seen in the past the federal government enact nationwide legislation, which was deemed unconstitutional. We've had some recent wins in court with respect to the Impact Assessment Act. We know that the federal government did not respect the Supreme Court's decision in that regard. And what they ended up doing was making, in our view, inconsequential changes to the Impact Assessment Act in order to get around the Supreme Court of Canada's decision.
The federal government has been using the power of their minions, which is the Supreme Court of Canada, to pull some of the worst bullshit I have ever seen. Like, our Supreme Court is a absolute farce. It is a joke. They're not doing their job. They do not represent the citizens. They represent the government. The fact that they allowed them to put this whole carbon tax across a country, in the actual documents, in the answers of the Supreme Court were, since they were doing it equally amongst the entire country, that it deemed it as fair, as good governance. And then what happened? They took a carve out for Atlantic Canada. Atlantic Canada, wake up. Wake up, people. They carved them out, which literally broke the entire idea of neutrality and not using the carbon tax politically. It was political to begin with, but to protect themselves in their decision, they said, well, since they're going to do it equally across the board, everybody in Canada, it's not an actual political thing. They're doing it for good governance. They're doing it because it's their job to do it. Climate change happens. Yes, it's never stopped since Earth began. It happens every day. Climate change is ongoing. They've been lying about the numbers. More and more is coming out all the time. I'm going to show you a chart here right away. The carve-out exposed the protectionist Supreme Court. Did the Supreme Court act on it? Did they drop? Did they actually come out and say, whoa, seeing as how now the government has used it as a political purpose, we realize the mistake that was made, and we are not going to allow them to do it? No, they haven't. Because that would show that they're losers. It would show they are complicit with the government and against the citizens and people of our nation, which isn't going to be a nation very long, people. I can't express this enough. Canada is going to fall very soon. That's my guess. Take it as you will, but it's going to happen. If Carney gets elected or we end up with a minority conservative government, the wheels are already in motion. This is going to happen. They lie, they cheat, and they deceive. I'm going to let this guy finish, and then I'm going to show you a chart.
We take the position that we're going to respect the court. We're going to abide by the court, especially when it is a ruling from our country's highest court. However, the federal government has not done that. And so we continue to take these measures to protect our industry, to protect the people who are looking to invest in Alberta. And quite frankly, with the decisions that the federal government has made with respect to our oil and gas industry, many companies are questioning whether they should invest in Canada. We want to make sure that Alberta is the jurisdiction that they invest in, that they know that there's a government that will defend them if they do, and we're up for the challenge and we'll be there if we need to be.
Yeah, just
And companies are fleeing. By the way, I just heard of another one. This is in BC because of EB people. BC, again, you got to get your shit together, man. Are we Canada or are we not Canada? Are we united or are we not united? EB is... This guy is completely over the edge, nut bar. A furniture producing outlet manufacturer has just announced they're closing the door. I think it's 170 jobs, plus all of the furniture sales and stuff that are within Canada, Canadian made, has just said they're moving to the United States. Just another company. There's at least one every 2 or 3 days that I find like that very easily. And this was going on before Trump, because they can't survive in Canada. They can't survive. This is the reality. Canada's broken.
I guess taking away from that, then you do feel confident if there was such a challenge. And then also going back to the 2 kilometer deep border zone, it was designated in...
Okay, I'm going to show you a chart. Now, there's a scientist. He's probably the top the very top knowledgeable scientist who works with thousands of other scientists that are all the top of their fields in a very broad spectrum that have completely debunked this CO2 bullshit narrative. It's bullcrap, people. They like to show you the hockey stick and they only show you from 1960 and blah, blah, blah. We are at the lowest CO2 emissions in history, as far back as we can test. And they're still pouring more ice samples, and they're doing coring. They're actually trying to do this out in the ocean, because there were lots of places that when we were under 2 miles of ice less than 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, that all of these shores weren't underwater. So they're going back and they're actually testing, because there were times where the entire ice or the entire planet had no water. It was all ice. It shows the CO2 levels from that far back. Take a look at this. There you go, right there. Now, I like this, the way they did it. So you have the dinosaurs in the far left at the top. This is CO2 emissions and temperature data. All the way down. Watch, see the CO2? CO2's on the bottom. Okay? Check this out. Look where we are. Look where the CO2 levels are on the right-hand side of the screen. The temperature increases are minuscule to the trend of the CO2. And they don't follow it perfectly. The whole part of these graphs, they twist and lie and shrink and only show you what you need to see in order for you to be convinced that, oh my God, CO2 is the enemy. If you notice at the Antarctic glaciation period, how it leveled off, check out how long it took after for the CO2s to level off. Isotopes, people. There's a lot more science involved than just saying CO2. It's not just CO2. CO2 is irrelevant. Believe it or not, water vapor plays a much significant role in the increase of global temperatures. That is a fact. I will post a link in the bottom description where I put all of my homework so you can see it for yourself, to a Tucker Carlson interview where he interviews Willie Soon. If you don't know who Willie Soon is, look him up. Tucker Carlson does this great interview, and he just flushes the entire CO2 bad, climate agenda right down the toilet. Why is it that you only see politicians, not scientists, real scientists, getting up beside these politicians even saying, we got to stop CO2, because they're non-existent, people. And if they are, they're paid for by either the government or corporations who are trying to push this agenda. There is over 16,000 scientists that have got together and signed petitions against this climate alarmism. 16,000 plus people. Wake up. Please like, share, and subscribe. Get the word out. I'm going to speed ahead a little bit later. Listen to this and then shake your head. Because, like I said, checkmate, Canada. Checkmate.
Understand that if our people are being hurt here and our businesses are being hurt here, we're really encouraging them to buy local, buy Canadian, and buy from countries that honor their free trade agreements.
Thank you. And we'll take one more from the phones, and we might have time for one more question here from the room. Operator, could you put through the next caller, please?
Rick Bell, Post Media.
Good afternoon. I've got a bit of a cold, so it's going to be a gravelly question. Poll after poll is showing that the Carney Liberals could win an election, and that is coming up. Premier, what are you prepared to deal with that? To deal with that possible, some people would say probable, but let's just keep it possible reality, especially in light of the fact that when the Liberals won a second term, there was huge frustration in Alberta. When they won a third term, there was even greater frustration in Alberta over that victory. If they get a fourth term, I'll leave it at that. How are you prepared to deal with what could come out of a victory by Carney and the Liberals?
Well, I can tell you, President Donald Trump seems to want the Liberals to win again. He gave an interview with Laura Ingraham yesterday saying that he'd prefer for the Liberals, and you have to wonder why. I think it's because the Liberals have made us weak over the last 10 years, and he wants to see that weakness continue. I certainly don't. I want to see us be the strong and united country that I know we can be, getting our products to market and working together collaboratively to do so. So I have always felt that the key to having a united country is to respect the constitutional authority and jurisdiction of each province. I see that Quebec feels exactly the same way. They did a fair deal panel, very much inspired, I think, by what we did here in Alberta. And I think that you're seeing that the provinces are exerting their authority far more than they ever had in the past because we have to. And you've seen the provinces work in a spirit of collaboration better than I've ever seen in the time that I've been in this job, or even in the past 10 years. And so I'm prepared to continue to support Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. That's been my mantra right from the beginning. And I hope that we have a partner in the federal government who's willing to accept this new reality. I quite frankly think that any government that's going to advocate that we stop building pipelines or block building pipelines or block a province from getting their product to market, I would hope that Canadians wouldn't vote for that government.
And supplementary, if that were to happen, how would you deal with the almost certain frustration, disappointment, frustration, and even anger that there would be yet another Liberal government in Ottawa that might be unfriendly to Alberta?
Well, I would say that I've got a term sheet, and my term sheet has a few key things on it. Number one, respect Section 92A of the Constitution, which we are reinforcing here today with this legislation. Allow us the autonomy to develop our resources and get them to market. Number two, repeal the offending sections of Bill C-69, which prevents us from being able to build pipelines, end the tanker ban off the West Coast, which prevents us from exporting our product internationally, end the net zero power regs, end the net zero vehicle standards, end any talk of an emissions cap, end any talk of a methane emissions cap, end the war on plastics, which we also, incidentally, was another area that we won at the federal court, and treat Alberta as a partner. Those are very simple things. Those should not be difficult things to agree to because it's enshrined in our Constitution. So I will put that term sheet before whoever wins the next election, and I guess we'll see what the federal response is.
Thanks, Premier. Thanks, Rick. We have time for one more question. We're going to go to James in the back here.
Premier, some people would argue that Mark Carney has an almost religious attachment to net zero, and that has a lot of people worried. One energy expert I spoke with today said that Mark Carney is going to come for Alberta in a similar manner as Trudeau and Guilbeault. How worried are you?
I think there's a real danger that the new prime minister is worse than the old prime minister. I haven't read his book, Values, but if one of his values is keeping oil and gas in the ground and he thinks Alberta can operate on wind and solar and battery power, he's got another thing coming. So I will be able to make our case very clearly, especially in the changing environment we find ourselves in, that our world needs more energy. They need more energy from a reliable democratic source and ally. And the world is very interested in what Alberta has to offer. And I would hope that they would work in partnership with us to be able to get that to market. So I haven't had that conversation with the new prime minister yet. I intend to, and I'll have to vet it at that time. But everything I've seen so far suggests to me that, ending the retail carbon tax just so consumers can't see it when they go and fill up their gas or when they look at their home heating bill, but then walloping our industry with potentially higher taxes, that's just not going to fly. So that's what I'm hearing from the Prime Minister, is that he's doing an action to get political popularity, but the effect on our industry here is no different than what we saw under Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So Can we work through that? I don't know yet, but I can tell you I'm not encouraged by what I've seen so far.
And did you have a follow-up, James, or is that it? Perfect. Well,
I'll take that
I'm going to end it there. Keep this video short. I'm sorry it's another long one. It's really hard to try and really get these points across without showing you as much evidence as possible so that you understand the entire concept and the reality of what is going on in our country. I'm going to show you one more little thing before I end. Alberta has been discussing this for generations on how Alberta supports war and hate in these nasty countries. The East Coast has been wanting our oil for a long time. Now, most people there are like oblivious because of the mainstream media that they succumb to every day. We allowed the Russian war to happen. People like myself were speaking out about it before the Liberals, the new Liberal Party, the fascist Liberal Party of Trudeau, and all of these cabinet ministers, every one of them, before they took power, we knew what was going on. And we saw that they were going, by stopping Alberta oil and canceling Energy East, it was funding the hate that was happening in the Middle East and all across Eurasia. Canada allowed this to happen. Believe it or not, right now, this isn't going to last long when Alberta and Alberta and Saskatchewan leave, but right now, we are truly the most powerful nation on the planet. We've just never been allowed to take the collar off to unleash what we have. And it's not just our resources and energy. It's the Canadianism, peace, love, compassion, and freedom. We've been held back, and this last government really did it. They're still importing blood oil. This money goes to people who hunt down and kill the LGBTQ, Christians, Yazidis, all different types of religions. The conflicts are being powered by blood oil. Oil is the gold that supports all of these nations. If we can cut them off and supply other nations that have the same democracy, or at least fairly close to the same ideals and principles that we stand up for, we can slowly stop this from happening and cause those countries to react in a necessary movement for a better country that they live in. We wouldn't see the mass migrations. We wouldn't see all of this intolerance. We wouldn't see all of these genocides. We could have snuffed this out generations ago, people. And the government we have in power now has allowed this to explode. Russia would never have attacked if we would have started exporting our natural gas and oil to Europe. This is where Trump is light years ahead of Canada. And we're lagging. And now we're on the verge of self-destruction. This is the reality. I hope you were entertained. I hope I enlightened you. I hope that you like, share, and subscribe and get the word out to everybody so we can break the bubble, break the propaganda arm of our fascist government. Until next time, you guys, I'm Alias Tagay with the Canadian Citizen Journal. Stay informed.